They say blood is thicker than water, but in my house,
blood was just a currency my father used to buy my silence. Turning 30 in a city like Seattle isn't cheap, but I wasn't spending that money on myself. For 4 months, I lived like a ghost. I traded my $7 craft IPS for tap water, and my morning Starbucks runs for burnt office part coffee. I walked 12 blocks to the light rail station in the pouring rain just to save the $15 on Uber rides. Every cent was funneled into a velvet-lined box containing a classic Hamilton Jazzmaster. To me, that $900 timepiece wasn't just a gift. It was a bridge. It was my way of saying, I've made it, and I'm taking you with me. The dinner at the steakhouse in Bellevue was supposed to be the victory lap.
But as the candlelight flickered against my father's face, I saw that familiar, sharp edge in his eyes. When he unwrapped the watch, he didn't check the movement or admire the leather strap.
He didn't even put it on. He just set it on the table like a piece of junk mail. Is this it, Michael? He sneered, his voice cutting through the ambient jazz of the restaurant. A shiny toy.
While you're out here playing big shot, your brother David is the one actually keeping the lights on in the house.
He's the one paying the groceries, the heating, the real bills. You just bring trinkets to a house you're lucky to sleep in. The sting wasn't just in the insult.
It was in the absolute, towering delusion of it.
I looked at David, who sat there basking in the unearned glory, nodding solemnly as if he'd personally signed every check. That was the moment the quiet, reliable Michael died.
I realized then that I wasn't a son to them. I was an invisible utility provider. And it was time for a blackout. I felt the heat rising in my neck, but I didn't let it reach my face.
In that high-end Bellevue steakhouse, surrounded by the scent of expensive Merlot and aged rye, I realized that the only thing more dangerous than a lie is a truth no one is prepared to hear. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water, set the glass down with a soft clink, and leaned in. I didn't raise my voice.
I kept it low, steady, the kind of tone you use when you're reading a death certificate. That's interesting, Dad, I said, my smile not reaching my eyes. Because if David is the one keeping the lights on, he must be doing it with thoughts and prayers.
Since 2024, every single cent that keeps that roof over your head has come out of my Chase private client account. The $4,500 mortgage, Autopay, the 1 gigabyte fiber internet you use to stream your shows, my account, the Puget Sound energy bill, the water, even the trash pickup. I've had them all rigged to my routing number for 24 months straight. The shift in the room was physical. It was like the oxygen had been sucked out of the booth. My father's mouth opened, but no sound came out, just a faint, wheezing gasp of a man realizing his reality was built on sand. David's face didn't just go pale.
It went a sickly, translucent grey, the color of someone about to be caught in a hit and run. He couldn't even look at me. He just stared at his steak as if it held the secrets of the universe. My stepmother, Susan, who usually had a comment for everything, suddenly found a profound fascination with the sediment at the bottom of her cabinet. She knew, deep down, they all knew the math didn't add up on David's freelance income.
But it was easier to believe the lie that fit their narrative. I've been the ghost in the machine. Dad, I whispered, the irony of the Hamilton watch still sitting rejected on the table between us. But the thing about ghosts is, once you stop believing in them, they tend to disappear.
And they take their money with them. The truth didn't spark a moment of clarity.
It triggered a defensive reflex so toxic it actually made the air feel thin. For the next 40 minutes, the dinner was a graveyard of clinking silverware, and avoided eye contact.
I expected a thank you, or maybe a horrified apology.
Instead, I watched them retreat into a whispered huddle while I settled the $400 dinner tab on my card, of course, just as the waiter brought the check tray. David didn't reach for his wallet. Instead, he reached into his blazer pocket and slid a folded piece of heavy cream stationery across the white tablecloth. It was deliberate. It was cold. We talked, David said, his voice regaining a pathetic shred of unearned authority.
And we think it's best if you move out.
You've become
a source of tension, Mike.
It's hard for Dad and Susan to feel at home with this kind of financial holding hanging over their heads.
You have 30 days to find a new spot. I opened the note. It wasn't just a scribble. It was a PRE-drafted family agreement. They had planned this.
They had sat in that house, the house I paid for sipping wine I bought, and plotted how to get rid of the tension. The irony was a physical weight in my chest. They were trying to evict the foundation while they were still living in the attic. My father wouldn't even meet my gaze.
He just nodded solemnly, siding with the golden boy who hadn't contributed a cent, but offered the comfort of a shared lie. They honestly believed that by removing the person, they could keep the perks. They thought my bank account was a permanent tap that would keep flowing even after they cut the pipes. I folded the paper carefully and tucked it into my pocket next to the receipt for their dinner.
I didn't argue. I didn't beg.
I just looked at Susan's $200 highlights and David's designer shoes, all subsidized by the source of tension, and felt a strange, cold clarity. 30 days, I said, standing up. I think I can make a lot happen in 30 days.
In fact, why don't we start tonight?
I drove home in a silence so thick it felt like I was underwater. No radio, no podcasts, just the hum of the tires and the rhythmic beating of a heart that was done being exploited.
When I walked through the front door of that Bellevue house, the lights were on, the heater was humming, and the Wi-Fi was pulsing through the walls. Everything was working perfectly because of me. It was the last time it would ever feel that way. I didn't go to the kitchen for a glass of water. I didn't say goodnight.
I went straight to my room, cracked open my MacBook, and began the digital surgical strike.
First, the lifestyle. I logged into Amazon Fresh and cancelled the $3 a week grocery delivery that kept the pantry stocked with the organic kale and prime cuts Susan loved.
Then, the entertainment. YouTube TV, HBO Max, the premium Spotify family plan gone. I watched the subscription cancelled, confirmations pop up like little white flags of surrender. Next, I went for the infrastructure.
I logged into the Puget Sound Energy portal and the Seattle Public Utilities site.
I didn't just stop the payments.
I scheduled a request to stop service for the end of the week.
In the eyes of the city, this house was about to become a dark, silent shell. Then came the heavy hitter.
In 2021, after Dad's bankruptcy had left his credit score in the dirt, I'd opened a high-limit Sapphire Reserve car to help him rebuild. I'd made him an authorized user, letting him use it for emergencies that had slowly turned into daily Starbucks runs and golf fees.
I didn't just cancel it.
I reported the physical card as frozen due to security concerns as I sat there in the glow of the screen.
I realized they were probably downstairs right now,
watching a movie I was paying for, eating food I had bought, feeling powerful because they'd evicted me.
They had no idea that I wasn't just moving out, I was taking the entire world they lived in with me. You want the house without the tension?
I whispered to the empty room. Fine, let's see how you like the house without the heat. I knew that in the state of Washington,
being the bankroll without being on the lease is a dangerous legal grey area, but tonight, it was my greatest weapon.
For 22 months, I had played the part of the perfect, invisible tenant. My electronic transfers hit the property management's account at 8 a.m. on the 1st of every month, like clockwork. To the landlord, I was the golden goose. To my family, I was just a convenient at m.t 2 a.m., while the rest of the house slept in subsidized comfort. I drafted the email that would change everything.
I wasn't just moving out. I was performing a legal amputation. I contacted the property manager, a no-nonsense woman named Elena who only cared about two things, her property and her occupancy stats.
I attached a formal notice of termination of financial responsibility. I laid it out in cold, professional terms. I was never a signatory on the primary lease. I was an occupant who had been providing voluntary
third-party payments that were ending in exactly 72 hours. I explicitly stated that my name was to be purged from any implied tenancy and that I would not be responsible for a single cent of the $4,500 monthly rent moving forward. I was the ghost leaving the machine, and I wanted the paper trail to be as clean as a fresh kill. I knew exactly what this would trigger. The property management company didn't care about family tension or David's ego. They cared about the fact that David died, and Susan didn't meet the 3x rent-to-income ratio required to live in a Bellevue zip code. Without my salary backing the application, they weren't residents. They were liabilities. As I hit send, I felt a surge of adrenaline. I had spent years protecting them from the harsh reality of the American credit system, shielding them from the consequences of their own bad decisions.
By demanding I leave, they had handed me the scissors to cut the cord. They thought they were kicking me out of their home.
They didn't realize that without me, they didn't have a home.
They just had a very expensive set of walls that were about to start demanding money they didn't have. The tension they wanted to eliminate was gone.
But it was replaced by something far more visceral, the cold, hard reality of the American grid.
On Tuesday morning, The silence of the house was shattered by a frantic scream from the home office. Susan was mid-pitch on a Zoom call for a luxury listing when the screen flickered and died.
The 1 GB fiber internet, the invisible thread holding her career together, had been cut at the source. The dominoes didn't just fall.
They accelerated. An hour later, my father pulled his SUV into the Shell station on 112, his tank on empty.
He swiped the Sapphire Reserve card for a full tank of premium, expecting the usual effortless approval.
Instead, the screen flashed a cold, clinical, declined contact issuer. He tried again.
Same result.
He stood there in the wind, a 60-year-old man with a high-end SUV and 0 ways to power it, realizing his authorized user status was a ghost of the past. By Thursday, the house had lost its pulse. A bright yellow notice of disconnection from Puget Sound Energy was taped to the front door with the kind of aggressive adhesive that leaves a mark.
No heat, no lights.
Just the echoing silence of a Bellevue mansion that had suddenly become an expensive tent. My phone was a war zone of no caller ID pings and frantic, one-sided voicemails.
But I wasn't there to hear them. I had already moved my life into a 500 square foot studio in Capitol Hill, a place where the rent was half what I used to pay, and the only person I was responsible for was myself.
I changed my number, blocked their emails,
and spent my Thursday night at a quiet bar around the corner,
sipping a drink I could actually afford now that I wasn't subsidizing 3 other adults. For the first time in 2 years, the lights in my home were on, and I was the only one who knew how to keep them that way. In the toxic ecosystem of my family, the truth was never about facts, it was about who spoke the loudest.
By Friday, the narrative had been set. I was the ungrateful son who had snapped and left his elderly father in the dark. My inbox became a dumping ground for family guilt.
Aunt Linda, who hadn't called me since my graduation,
left a sobbing voicemail calling me calculating and heartless. Cousins from Chicago I hadn't seen in a decade sent Instagram DMs lecturing me on familiar and the sacred bond of loyalty.
It was a coordinated strike, designed to shame me back into opening my wallet. But then, the chatter revealed the real poison.
I found out David hadn't just been taking credit for my payments.
He'd been weaponizing them. He had spent months hitting up our relatives for emergency loans, claiming he was struggling to cover the very bills I was paying on Autopay. He was double-dipping, using my bank account to live for free while using the pretense of my bills to scam our own blood for extra cash. That was the line.
They wanted a villain. I'd give them a witness.
I didn't engage in the comments. I didn't argue on the phone. Instead, I spent 3 hours in my new studio apartment with a laptop and a stack of PDFs.
I created a clean, undeniable spreadsheet.
3 columns: date, service, amount.
I highlighted the $4,500 monthly mortgage payments, the $600 grocery hauls, and the $12,000 I'd spent helping Dad clear his post-bankruptcy debt.
Total household support over 20 for months, 65. Oh. I posted the summary to our private family
Facebook group and my Instagram story with a simple caption. I've been asked a lot about family loyalty this week. Here is my contribution to that loyalty.
If David would like to show his receipts for the same period, I'll be happy to issue a public apology. The silence that followed was deafening. The DM stopped.
Aunt Linda deleted her comments.
The family loyalty talk didn't just fade, it vanished.
You can't gaslight a bank statement. A month into my new life, I thought the dust had settled.
I was finally sleeping through the night until a formal, heavy envelope arrived via certified mail. No family crest this time, just the letterhead of a mid-tier law firm in downtown Seattle. They weren't asking for a reconciliation. They were suing me. In a move of pure, desperate delusion.
David had convinced my father to file a claim for breach of verbal contract. Their argument was as American as it gets, because I had established a consistent pattern of financial support. I had created an implied contract.
They claimed that by stopping the payments without adequate notice, I had caused them foreseeable financial distress. Essentially, they were trying to legally mandate that I remain their personal ATM for life. I took the papers to a friend of mine, a sharp contract attorney named Sarah.
She sat in her office, read through their filing, and started laughing.
Not a polite chuckle, a full, soul-cleansing laugh. They're actually claiming you're a utility company, Mike, she said, shaking her head. But they forgot one very important thing. I handed her the cream-colored stationery David had slid across the steakhouse table a month prior. The family agreement where they explicitly demanded I move out within 30 days. Sarah's eyes lit up. This isn't just a note. It's a gift. In any contract, even a verbal one, if the party receiving the benefit terminates the relationship, they forfeit the benefit.
They evicted their own funding.
You don't owe them a notice period when they're the ones who threw you out of the building. She sent a single, scathing response to their lawyer.
It included a copy of their own eviction note, and a polite suggestion that if they pursued this further, we would countersue for the $65,000 in unjust enrichment David had gained by scamming relatives under false pretenses. I never heard from that law firm again.
It turns out, even the most expensive lawyers can't fix a case built on ego and empty pockets.
They had tried to use the law to shackle me, only to realize they'd handed me the keys to the courthouse. The collapse of the Bellevue dynasty was swift and clinical.
Without my $3,000 plus monthly subsidy acting as a structural beam, the lifestyle they'd spent years curated began to buckle under its own weight.
It turns out that when you remove the silent provider, the golden child and the proud patriarch are just two people with bad credit and zero leverage. By at the end of the second month, the moving trucks arrived.
They didn't go to another waterfront suburb.
They ended up in a cramped, two-bedroom garden apartment in a grain complex near the airport, a place where the roar of the planes drowned out the silence of their resentment. The most satisfying part wasn't their struggle. It was seeing them finally engage with the reality they'd ignored for years.
David, the man who was too entrepreneurial for a 9-to-5,
was forced to take a grueling entry-level role at a logistics firm in Kent. I heard he spent
his days tracking shipping containers and his nights realizing that freelancing doesn't pay for a 1 gigabyte fiber connection. My father had to undergo the most humbling transformation of all.
For the first time since his bankruptcy, he had to sit down with a pencil and a legal pad and track his social security check down to the last cent. No more emergency golf rounds. No more steak dinners on my dime. I realized then that I hadn't been helping them for the last 2 years. I had been crippling them.
I had turned my own family into financial parasites by shielding them from the very consequences that make people grow.
They weren't incapable of surviving. They were just lazy because I had made the alternative so comfortable. Watching them from a distance, I felt a strange mix of pity and relief. They were finally living the life they could actually afford.
It was smaller, louder, and humbler, but for the first time in a decade, it was honest. It's been exactly 1 year since I settled into my studio in Capitol Hill.
I am 31 now.
And the person I was back in that Bellevue steakhouse feels like a stranger from a different life. For the first time, I am not just earning a living, I'm building one. Without the $40,000 annual family tax I was paying, my savings account has surged more in 12 months than in the previous 5 years combined.
I have an emergency fund, a burgeoning retirement portfolio, and most importantly, peace. A few weeks ago, a handwritten letter arrived. No legal threats, no demands for loyalty, just my father's shaky cursive on a plain white envelope.
He didn't ask for a loan. Instead, he wrote a single haunting sentence. I didn't realize what I had until the house went dark. He's living in that apartment near the airport now, finally understanding that a home isn't built on pride, but on the quiet sacrifices someone else was making while he wasn't looking. I haven't replied, not out of malice, but because some silences are earned. The Hamilton Jazzmaster still sits in its original box on my dresser.
I don't wear it. In fact, I haven't even worn it. But every morning, as I grab my keys and head out to a life I finally own, I look at that dial. It's no longer a symbol of the rejection I felt that night.
It's a monument to my own worth. I've learned the hard way that in the American pursuit of success, kindness without boundaries isn't a virtue, it's just a slower form of self-destruction. I spent years trying to be the hero of a story where I was actually the enabler. The watch reminds me that you can't buy someone's respect, and you certainly can't fund their maturity.
Sometimes the most loyal thing you can do for the people you love is to stop being their safety net. Sometimes you have to let them fall, not because you want them to fail,
but because you finally want them to learn how to stand. I'm Mike. I'm 31, and for the first time in my life, I'm not looking at the clock.
I am finally living in my own time. Thanks for watching.
Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. What do you think about this story? Let me know in the comments.